Back to the Pediatric Speech Sisters show. I'm so excited to have Rachel back on. She goes by PTSD SLP on Instagram. And Rachel came on the show. She was actually one of my first interviewees. We were just talking about this in January. And she talked a lot about trauma informed care for children coming back from winter break. So, Rachel, I was just doing my regular scroll through Instagram and I saw that you got accepted for an ASHA presentation about supervisor. Could you tell us the title of it? I don't want to butcher it.
I think it's trauma-informed care and supervision, and specifically for SLPs and whoever else attends ASHA. So it's going to be for providers, but talking about SLP supervisorship.
Yes. And so we're definitely going to dig a lot deeper into that, but I want to give you an official introduction. One thing about Rachel, she is an SLP program specialist for Broward County Public Schools after a traumatic event happened at her workplace on February 14th, 2018. She looked for ways to help work with students and herself after trauma. She found trauma-informed care and has been presenting nationally to SLPs and other providers on how trauma-informed care can be used in their setting. She runs an Instagram account, ptsd.slp, which discusses trauma-informed care from a speech lens. So, Rachel, is there anything else I missed about your introduction? Anything else you'd like to add?
I think that's it. I did just get a full website. I did that over the summer, and it is www.ptsdslp.com. So if I know a lot of time people say they don't have Instagram, and that's okay. I'm all about getting off of social media. But if people want to contact me, they can contact me through the website. My email is on there. So lots of on what I do and how I could help educate people on trauma informed care.
And Rachel, I did go ahead and take a sneak peek because I know we were talking about websites in the past. And everyone, I definitely encourage you to check out her website. I can tell she put a lot of effort into it. It's very informative. Yeah, I already know.
It's a lot of work. And honestly, it looks like if I were to go back to school, graphic design and web design seems so interesting to me, but it's another language. It's so complicated. And I just did Squarespace, but it's so
Mm,
cool.
yeah, I love it. I actually love Squarespace. Can't even say it. Squarespace. That's like a whole other conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so, Rachel, can you tell us a little bit about your why you decided to get into the trauma informed care space?
Sure. So it was an accident, literally and figuratively, I guess. But
Mhm.
I always said I wanted to be a speech pathologist, and that's all I planned on doing. Like I said, I wanted to be a speech pathologist since fourth grade, and I never changed my mind. I became a speech pathologist. I went right from college to grad school to my first job. I was placed at a school, and right after my first year of the CF, I was fully credentialed in my second year, and a traumatic event happened at my workplace. And it's not like I looked up trauma informed care and go, "Oh, that's what I want to do," of speaking on it. I had no concept of it. I literally Googled, how do I work with students who have undergone trauma? Not even applying that I had gone through trauma. But
Mm.
what I've learned over time is that trauma informed care is for everyone. It's to understand me as an individual, it's to understand my students. But I had a really hard time coming back from that trauma, that specific trauma, and caring about speech when most of my students didn't feel safe. And the emphasis is always on, oh, billing and data and all this stuff, and I'm like, but they're crying. Like, what am I supposed to do here? Just push them along? um so I found trauma informed care, and over the past 5 years now, I've been teaching on it and using my experiences working with a specific community who has undergone trauma, myself who's undergone trauma, and meeting tons and tons of people over these last few years who have also gone through trauma, many of them SLPs. And we talk about even being an SLP and having trauma from being an SLP or in their job or at home. I talk about trauma all the time. And as someone who works with humans, any provider, especially healthcare, education, but even people in hospitality, we should be trauma
Mm.
informed. So I think
Mm.
it's so, so important.
Wow, I'm really happy that you mentioned people in hospitality because that is a whole other type of trauma. I used to work at a hotel on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. Yeah.
Ooh, man.
Yes, and that was during Trump era as a Black woman, and that was just, I mean, yeah. So another conversation, but I mean, one thing I wanted to say is I was going to tailor this for specifically speech pathologists, but I think that this is something that all healthcare providers and educators, and now that you even mention it, people of other industries should
Mhm.
definitely listen to. So let me ask you, what was the defining moment for you that let you really just say, let me extend this beyond just speech therapy treatment, but also the supervisors and supervisees?
So it was honestly the first thing that comes to mind when you say that is sitting in an IEP meeting when parents are telling me, look what their kids went through, look what their kids went through, with no thought from the parents of look what I went through. We all went through the same thing, and some have
Mhm.
been through worse things, but there needs to be some acknowledgement that what I went through was also traumatic, and I am supporting them as much as I can. And just some of the things that came out of parents and other staff members' mouths were not trauma informed at the time. I also think of all the supervisors that I had, specifically in getting into speech pathology, from CF mentors to my grad school clinical supervisors. Some of those experiences I do count as traumatic because they
Mm,
changed the way that I do things. So, for example, I was placed at a large acute care hospital in my final externship, and my relationship with my supervisor was so bad that I do not feel comfortable going into a medical setting because of the words that were said to me, because of how I felt every day. I cried every day during my externship, or my, yeah, full-time externship. And it's really interesting because I went to Flasha last summer, and a girl in her same time of year, same externship, not same place, but she came up and said the exact same story to me of what I went through. And she looked at me and she's like, "You went through this?" And I'm like, "The
mm,
exact same thing, like same situation." And just to hear that validated her in a way that she didn't know that it was okay that other people went through that, or to feel that she wasn't alone. So I do acknowledge that a lot of trauma is happening within our field, and it could be just the supervisors, and the supervisors have some of their own, which we'll
mm.
in a little bit. But I think to acknowledge the way that we talk to people and the way that we discuss things with our mentees, we want to do that in a way to reduce risk of causing harm. That is the premise of trauma informed care. What can I do to reduce the risk of causing harm?
Thank you. Something that's coming up for me is so many people who I've met, even my own supervisor, my favorite supervisor ever, Dr. Donna Rice. We were in the education setting, and she told me when she was going through her graduate program and was in the hospitals, that was very traumatic for her. And so,
Mhm.
and I didn't get to have a hospital experience, but I've heard that same story. What do you think it is about the healthcare setting that perpetuates that traumatic communication or traumatizing
Okay.
communication?
The first thing that
Mhm,
I talk about a lot, because so number 1, when I present on trauma informed care, I teach about how we as an individual can be trauma informed, with the big caveat that I cannot be 100% trauma informed as a provider if the systems above me are not trauma informed. So,
mm,
in the case of a healthcare system, if I'm working at a hospital and they're demanding 90% productivity, I'm not providing great patient care. I'm not individualizing. I'm not able to provide my best trauma informed care because at the end of the day, it's about the credits. It's about the productivity numbers. So,
mhm,
the productivity is running how you are as a provider, and that is contributing to possible harm being caused. In the school system, that might look like there's no caseload cap in Florida. So if I get placed as a CF with 120 kids and there's no help coming, I can't provide the best care that I can, leading to possibly more mistakes,
mhm,
not individualized care. So the systems have to be trauma informed as well. So the healthcare industry with insurance and billing, all these things that are business oriented, are not human oriented. And I could go on an entire presentation about that.
Yes, I saw you, like, cracking your knuckles. I get it. Well, then how would you say that that translates to the education sector?
So, I mean, the education sector, I'm in Florida. There's a lot of laws that are coming down that are preventing autonomy from teachers, and people feel that that's good, that's bad. Like, it's a very controversial thing. Um, but we also have huge classrooms. We've got classes that, one complaint that I hear from teachers is the better they are with ESE children, students with disabilities, they're given so many in a classroom because they
Mhm,
can tolerate it when other teachers don't know how to work with it and they're not good for them. So what ends up happening is you have one teacher that's got 40 kids in a classroom, and there is a ratio of how many students with IEPs are supposed to be in a room. That's blown out of proportion because they say, well, you work with them so well, like, it's not reward, but they put them
mhm,
in there because they will support them, but that's not, with the huge number, they're not going to be able to provide the best care and the best teaching to their students. So it all comes down to the less numbers that we have in order to be better as a teacher, as an educator, an administrator, whoever we are. The systems in place above us need to support us for appropriate numbers, appropriate pay. It's
mhm.
all these systems have to be trauma informed.
So what would you say is the first step for these systems to become trauma informed? Because before you answer that, just from what you're saying and me listening to you, it seems like it's like a trickle down effect.
Yes.
So since the systems aren't trauma informed, the people working, the supervisors aren't being very empowered to even be trauma informed, and then that feeds into their students. And I thought about when you mentioned your supervisor in the med setting, and just something that I know from my own trauma from past supervisors and leadership is that they do what was done to them.
Yeah. They
So,
can. They can.
yeah, typically it seems like it's almost like a generational thing,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah.
from your perspective, what could be done?
I think that people need to be trained on trauma informed care. So when I talk about trauma informed care, one of the big things that I talk people through is a self reflection.
Mm,
And if I go through a reflection with someone and I say, "Have you ever caused harm?" Their gut reaction is going to be no, because none of us went into this profession to cause harm. But the
right.
reality is harm is unintentional most of the time. How many apologies do we get that are, that wasn't my intention? It doesn't matter about the intention, it hurts someone. So
Mm,
we have to be very mindful, and I think it's very helpful to do a self reflection of what how did I speak to someone? Is there a way I could have approached this better? What could be going on? So I'm trying to think of, in my situation in the hospital setting, if I am, upset, if I'm showing a behavior that's a bit different, I would hope that my supervisor comes to me and say, "Hey, I noticed that your behavior is a little off today." And not even behavior, just like, you're acting a little bit different today. Is everything okay?
mhm,
Instead of egging it on, ignoring it, or piling things on top. When you sense something like that, you should be like, how can I help support you in this moment, instead of what's wrong with you? And I always
mhm,
recommend, one, if people are interested in trauma informed care, one of a good intro book for me is What Happened to You by Oprah and Dr. Bruce Perry. I think it's a
mm,
really good introduction to it, and it's not so neuroscience heavy that people stop reading those books because they're like, I don't want to learn about the brain, I just want to know about trauma.
yeah.
Um, so I think it's a good intro book and the audiobook, but I think the reflection helps us understand how we are actually coming off to people, because if we say, "Oh, I've never done anything wrong. I've never said anything to hurt someone," we're not being realistic. We could have, and how can we prevent ourselves from causing additional harm or further harm?
Mhm. And so, even just to answer that question, how can we prevent ourselves from doing further harm? That takes self-reflection.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so, how would we know? Because I have 1,000 questions in my head because I'm
Yeah.
very interested in trauma-informed care. Um, Let me ask you this: could you give us an overview of your ASHA presentation and what that will be about?
Sure. So I need
Try.
to I need to start working on it. No, I have a lot of ideas. So what I actually started doing was I created a Google Doc and I posted it on my Instagram, and it's on my website right now, that I want people to send me their experiences. I want them to trauma dump. I usually say please don't trauma dump,
Mm,
but I want them to tell me experiences that they had as a mentee, as a mentor, so that I can evaluate it in real time and be like, here's how I would have addressed this. Here's how I would have been feeling as the mentor. So, one example would be if I'm the mentor of someone who is just not meeting my expectations. I need to take a step back and really say, what expectations are those? Is that their facial expressions are not what I'm expecting. Do
mm,
I need those facial expressions? So for me, I know that was one thing, and I'm still very self conscious of it. I was told constantly in undergrad and grad school, I'm a type B SLP. I am not bubbly and I'm not that typical SLP that you think of. I'm not a morning person, and I'm
mm,
very stoic. Is a nice way of saying RBF, right? So a lot of when I would go into work, I actually had one mentor tell me she thought I looked like I didn't want to be there. And I was just like, I was happy. I was chilling. I had a fine day. Everything was good. But it was the facial expressions that I think she was looking for me to be happier.
mhm,
And that's not who I am as a person. And that's masking and that's exhausting. So if that expectation is being put on me, why are they putting that expectation on me? So that's something that I ask people to reflect on. Is that actually necessary to put that expectation on someone? Are they someone who expresses emotions differently than I do? Are they an SLP that is doing different things that I do? Are they not, are
mhm.
they just different? And are they doing anything to cause harm? Is it something that I need to actively cut out? So I think all these reflection tools are helpful in understanding. So my presentation for ASHA is really going to be going through some of these examples of what my thoughts are as a mentor, what maybe some thoughts are as the mentee, and where you need to bridge the gap, and how I would address these concerns from a trauma informed perspective.
Mhm. Thank you so much for bringing that up. So, Rachel, we talk a lot about supervisors, and I'm sure people are watching this are like, yes, get on the supervisors. They're this and that, they're this and that. But let's talk about the supervisees and how supervisees can potentially traumatize supervisors.
Yes. So there are going to be highly stressful times of your job. And maybe you're a person that is not ready to take on a supervisor or a supervisee. Um, but your company is telling you you've got it. They have a new hire. They're supposed to help you with treatment, and you need to. You're not getting paid for it. It's just another thing of work that you're taking on.
Mm,
So that is an added stress. Um, there's such a thing as toxic stress. A lot of our jobs are already stressful as it is. With no benefits on top of that, it's not really something that a lot of people want to do. I know in a lot of places they have trouble filling CF supervisor positions because in a lot of places they're unpaid. There's not really a benefit, or some people want the control of their caseload and making sure that everything is done in their own way.
mhm,
So I think that's one easy part of it, is just the logistics of having someone that you may not expect to have. There's also, I don't think I think you can get a CF, or you can supervise a CF after 9 months.
okay.
I think you have to be in your C's for 9 months. I have to check ASHA on that. But you might just be out yourself and still not have a handle on things. You're giving me someone to mentor. I'm not in that place myself. So it's added stress. And then you have difficult students. I know that some of us have been in cohorts in grad school that you're like, how did this person pass? And
Mm,
they become SLPs. They've passed the praxis, they're good to go, but they're not really meeting the skills and expectations that you as a supervisor need. And you are worried that they will actively cause one of your patient's students harm. And that's valid.
yeah,
That's a fear.
yeah.
Where I think we need to bridge the gap as a supervisor is speaking appropriately to the people below you. Um, because that is where the trauma happens. And many of
Mhm.
us had parents that caused trauma in certain ways. So when you come as an authority figure to someone, you need to ask them how they prefer to take criticism, how they respond to criticism. Because if you say, oh, I'm just going to shame them and that'll work, that'll shame them into doing better, that doesn't actually work. They might have trauma from a parent causing them shame continuously. Um, there are many things to take into account. So I always say we need to communicate them. So if it's how do I that you're doing a good job? How do you prefer to receive that? Do you like little post-it notes? And it's kind of like love languages in a way. Like how do
Mhm.
you respond to things best? Because a lot of times our communication doesn't match up. So if they're giving me nonverbal signals that I'm doing well and I miss every single one of them, how's that
Mhm.
going to help me? Like, I don't know if I'm doing good or bad. How, if they're giving me nonverbal signals that I'm not doing well and I don't know what they are, I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. So
Mhm.
I think that needs to be discussion in the beginning of how to communicate with each other. And then as you keep going and things aren't improving, I think it's very important to continue to have open communication and do it from how can I support you versus you're not doing what I think you should be doing. I'm going to fail you.
Yeah.
It's always communication that helps prevent that possible trauma. And we don't want to be sending people crying every day. That's
Yeah.
not okay.
Yeah. One thing that I want to bring up that's just coming through my head, and I'm sure many people might even relate to this, is there's one school position that I almost took, and I started, but then I left because I was already traumatized from my
I
last two,
remember.
three
Yeah.
work settings. I don't think I actually got to tell you about this one, maybe, but I don't think I actually got to tell you about this one.
Okay,
This is
tell me.
not like other super traumatic work
Okay.
setting.
Several.
There's a few.
Okay, okay.
And so basically we're on the orientation meeting and she was just like, people say if you can survive in this school district, you can survive anywhere. Sometimes you're gonna have to be crying in your car, girl. That's okay. And I'm just like, I am in the wrong place. So I mean, what can you even say about that from a trauma informed lens? Because in her eyes, she is being supportive. I'm sure in her eyes, because I could tell she was also stressed, but just happy to be bringing people on to help delegate. And so she's like, I'm going to be honest with you. You might have to cry in your car, but the kids, and this is how she led with it or how she ended it, the kids are worth it. The kids are great. Well, I'm telling you right now, that is terrifying. I'm sure that the kids are great. I'm sure that the families are amazing. However, this is where I'm supposed to be 40 hours of my week. And if you're saying that I'm going to be crying in my car when I was just crying in my car the past three work settings, this isn't very appetizing to me. And it's actually re traumatizing.
Totally.
Um, Yes. So, I mean, from your perspective, what does that even look like and where she was coming from?
So she would say that her intentions were to support, and that
Sure.
totally is
Yeah.
the case. And I've been there too. That people, I mean, my first year, I was told I met an SLP in the school system that was like, "Get out while you can," and I was like, "What? I just spent, my life savings doing grad school, and I'm stuck. I have no option to get out of it." So
Mm,
I have trouble personally deciding. I think I talk a lot about the negatives of SLP stuff because I was a person that heard no negatives about it and went into a field that I
mhm,
feel sometimes needs a lot of work. It does need a lot of work in a lot of different areas. Um,
mhm,
but if I had been properly informed in undergrad, in grad school, if I had been able to observe what an SLP did in high school, I don't know if I would have chosen this. So I
mhm,
think we need as people who are choosing a profession, we need to be able to see what we're walking into. I think also from an interview perspective, we need to be asking about the school climate. We need to be asking about the turnover. We need to be asking specific questions that some of those might be red flags of like, I don't think that this is going to be a good fit for me.
mhm,
Many of us, some of us don't have. the option of choosing where we work. It's a financial thing. It's they're offering me a job, I'm taking it, I'll deal with it. And that's totally
Mhm.
valid too. But I think from the example that you gave, I would have held back a little bit. I would have responded, "We're so happy to have you here." Because that I'm sure they were very happy to have you here. But when I have trouble, it's that I want to let people know the negatives of things, but I also don't think that's starting things off in a good light. So my way of a trauma informed response would have just been validating of we're so happy to have you here. How can I support you while you're here? Because maybe you would have been able to handle that caseload with great support. But
Mhm.
I don't think I would have been comfortable with the person who's telling me, "Get out while you can," or, "It's not good." I don't know if they would have been able to support me in the way that I needed to be supported with what they come out with, you know? So,
Mhm.
I think we just have to validate and say, "We're happy to have you here," or, "Wow, it's been a while since I had someone here." But, like, if you say something and you're like, "How could this affect the person who is coming in?" And you're like, "Could that harm them?" Then I would stay away from it. That's how I
Yeah.
evaluate things.
Thank you so much for that.
Of course.
Thank you so, so, so much for that. Well, one other question I have, and I always say I have ADHD, so sometimes it leaves. I want to get back to the supervision part.
Okay.
What are some questions when interviewing, even just when interviewing somebody, and maybe it's even their first day on the job? What are some questions that we can ask that are more trauma informed that deal with communication styles and overall just make sure that we're not re traumatizing somebody or making them feel unwelcome in any way?
Okay. So when I present, I talk about the pillars of trauma informed care, which would be safety, trust and transparency, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment and choice, cultural, historical, gender issues, um, all of these things. So I want to make sure the person that's coming in feels safe. That's my number one priority. How can I make them feel safe? And whether that's an emotional safety, a safety from me being their supervisor, what would make them feel safe? And I can expand that to being what does safety look as a supervisor? Is
Mm,
that am I there in the rooms with them? Am I helping them out for a little bit? Am I showing them what I do first? Because I always
yeah.
said that I'm a visual learner. I need to
Mhm.
see the examples done first, and then I can kind of replicate it in my own way. But if the supervisor is saying, "No, just go in there and do it, and I'm going to watch you and tell you what you do wrong," that is not the way I learn best. That's shaming me, and I shut down. So
Mhm.
I think that it's important to kind of talk to each other about me as a supervisor. I would say to my supervisor, I would be like, there are going to be times that I want to correct what you're doing. How do you prefer that I correct you? Would that be in the moment? Is there a certain thing that I can tell you? Should I tap you on the shoulder? Should I jump in and show you? Do you want me to like get hands in? You can offer all these suggestions because that ties into choice. You
Yeah.
want to give them choice. You want to have them participate. And that also ties into collaboration. We're on the same team. Yes, you are their supervisor, but I don't come from the perspective that there should be a power dynamic. Even working with children, I don't think that there should be a power dynamic. I think you can still
Mm,
collaborate and be on the same team and be an authoritative figure and not be authoritarian because I didn't need someone to tell me what I'm doing wrong. I need someone to correct me, but I don't need someone to tell me what I'm doing wrong. So, I
mhm.
think communication, we need to communicate. So maybe there are some reflections. I know some people do like personality tests and whatever. So if you find that helpful, that could be good. However, I've been told Enneagrams are actually from a religious background. And people with religious trauma have said that Enneagrams actually stress them out because it was used a
Okay.
lot. So, personality tests are kind of iffy, but I think just communicate. Be like, ask questions. How do you prefer? How can I support you? How do you like to be praised? If you're doing something well, how would you like me to show you that? How do you
Mhm.
want me to act? Like it's all about communication. You just have to talk to each other.
One book that's coming to my mind is called The Strengths Finder. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I don't think so.
Finder. I'm trying to find the author just really quick. That's your old CF mentor, Pam. She's actually one who
Pam.
yes, we love Pam. She's actually one who recommends it. Yeah, by Tom Rath, Strengths
That
Finder.
is so funny.
So
So
that's just another one.
okay, I'm gonna write that down. Thank you, Pam. So
Yes.
Pam was actually when I was in undergrad, so 10 years ago,
Oh, wow.
I interned for her. So I just helped her like establish the private practice, and I was advertising, and I helped her with some programs that she was doing after school. But that was honestly the first time that I got to see what an SLP does. And I'm already in undergrad with my major confirmed. And that's not what it should be. We should have
Mm,
experience before we should see what it is because um I also just had a thought. I have ADD, so I just had a thought.
yes, I love it.
So I know how my grad program was built, that you did an adult internship and a child internship. And the
Mhm.
one that was the longer one was the externship. Some people realized that working with that population, like an older population, was re-traumatizing for them. They saw an older parent die, they saw a grandparent die, they lived in the house with them, something like that. So working with older professionals was traumatic for them. So when you as a supervisor are saying it's just a skilled nursing, relax, it's just a
Yeah.
this. We don't know what people gone through, and we don't need to find out. We're searching for it. When you open that communication between us, the likelihood that someone will feel safe and want to tell you what's going on is higher. But that's when you need to reflect and take away your self judgment of what someone's trauma or someone's experiences are, because we never want to be dismissive. Whatever someone is reporting to you, we want to say, that makes sense. I understand.
Mm,
I understand why you feel that way, or something like that. Um, because when we just say it's not a big deal, it could absolutely be a big deal to someone. So when I think of how we put some people in these long-term internships with a population they have no intention of working with just because they have to meet a standard, we have to be very careful that we are not adding to re-traumatization or traumatizing them further.
mhm. Few more questions because
Yes,
we're already at 30 minutes, but I really, of course, want to keep you here for like 2 hours.
that's fine.
One thing that is oh, it just left me. Here's one question I did have for you, though.
Okay.
What would you say we'll use Pam as an example, or maybe
Okay.
even another example that comes to mind, but just a supervisor, any success stories of what a supervisor has done for you, or a leadership person in the hotels, wherever, has done for you that made you feel safe and did not cause any further re-traumatization?
It's a tough one. I've worked a lot of jobs. I worked hospitality. I bartended for like through grad school. While I was in grad school, I loved my managers at that time because they always made me feel safe, like I was going to be taken care of.
Mm,
When I'm working now in a school and a community that has undergone trauma, some people are automatically like attuned to it and making me feel safe, but really it's the praise,
mm,
because most of undergrad is like thankless. It's not paid. So it's when we get some sort of I appreciate you, like just gives me life. It really is so important. And you might be a person that doesn't really respond to like, oh, I don't care if people tell me I'm doing well or not, but you have to take into account what the person you are mentoring does appreciate, because that takes you that little bit more into the profession. It helps your relationship. And it's not like we're doing this to manipulate a relationship. If a relationship happens out of it, that's awesome. But we want just the partnership to be open communication. And when you are supportive of that person in the way that they want to be supportive, that's helpful. And also, you as the supervisor deserve a trauma informed relationship from them too. So you can
mhm,
even say to them, like, you know what, I prefer if you do this. If you're having a hard time, could you let me know, because I don't know how to handle you, you know? So
mhm,
it's just
mhm,
asking that communication. It's like, I have been doing this for you. How should I change what I'm doing to better support you? And that should be an open conversation.
How would you recommend a supervisor? I remember the question now. How would you recommend for a supervisor who's taking a step back to check on their self criticism, not even self criticism, but for example, getting critiques from another student? So I'll just say, for example, you're a student who could potentially traumatize a supervisor because they're not used to getting criticism or they don't take criticism well themselves.
Mhm.
So, from a supervisor standpoint, how can you heal that, so to speak?
I don't know if you can heal that. Like it that
Reflect
would
on
be
it.
awesome, but I think it's what so one of the reflection steps is knowing
Mhm.
when you are triggered. So, and I explained trigger just means what happens when you're stressed. So, some people, and we've seen it on TV, we've seen it in the classroom that a teacher, kids are just running around like crazy and they're not listening to you, and you snap with just you yell at them to be quiet or you do something, you shut down. There's all these ways that you absorb stress. What are your triggers? Is it noises that bother you? Because me, I know I get overstimulated so easy. If someone is talking over here and another person is talking over here, I have now missed both conversations. They're
Yeah,
they're totally gone. So,
yeah.
I think it's important if one of your supervisees tells you like I can't focus in like a loud room and you're expected to type up your notes there, is there a way that like you can type it in a different room that's maybe quieter or put on headphones during the time so you could get those notes written up? um, but I think that self-reflection is really important of just understanding when you are upset, when you are stressed, how do you look to the person that you are supporting? Because you don't want to say anything. And I mean, trauma informed care, I'm making a 6-hour course right now. Like I can talk forever about it, but we cannot regulate someone else when you are dysregulated. So that's emotionally. If you are stressed out and your supervisee is stressed out, you're not going to be able to tell them to relax because you're not relaxed. So you all need to be on the same page, and that is with open communication. You have to be able to have those discussions and understand what stresses you out.
Well, thank you so, so much, Rachel. This has been very insightful, and I hope that everyone listening to this, I hope that our brains are kind of working and figuring out different ways that we can just be more trauma informed in all of our interprofessional collaborations, honestly. Is there anything else that you would like to add or share with the audience before we head out?
I think that my ASHA masterclass will be completely in order and create time November rolls around. But yeah, this was like a mini introduction to what I potentially will be speaking about. But I think it's just really important as a supervisor or supervisee to understand if we are more trauma informed and do trainings on trauma informed care, we can prevent any harm. We can try to prevent as much harm as possible. We're not going to get rid of all of it because we're not going to know everyone's triggers. We're not going to be able to know everything, but we can do little things and little language changes that help us not be a person who is repeatedly traumatizing someone.
You're wonderful, Rachel. Thank you
Oh,
so much for
thank you.
sharing your knowledge. Truly, truly. Well, y'all, you've heard it from her. Check her out at ASHA. Where else can we find you?
At Instagram at ptsd.slp and my new website at www.ptsdslp.com.
Thank you. Oh, and we do have Ari here. She says this was such an insightful episode, and she just is thanking us for this conversation.
Oh,
She's
thank you
going to be
so
starting her
much.
thesis pretty soon. So,
Congrats.
all right. Well, everybody, thank you so much. And I will see you next week for the next guest. Bye, fam.